Thank you very much, Dr. Chu. Okay, I would like to add some question to your presentation. Thank you for quickly overview the 10 months of Trump administration in the first part of your presentation. In your presentation, you repeatedly use the word starting with rebalancing, reindustrialization, remaking. But I think to discuss this kind of words, we need to clearly define the benchmark. So could you elaborate? How do you define the benchmark in discussing these kinds of rebalancing or remaking of order? You know that we observed that many successful episodes of deals Trump administration made, but for outside layman, it is a little bit difficult to drive message. What kind of order the Trump administration like to design and the rebalancing? What do you define the benchmark in trade deals?
Of course. Thank you, President Tomiota. That's a terrific question, and I think this is a terrific question because I think you can kind of answer it in two ways, right? So the fact that you're talking about means that you're constantly looking back, right? There was a time when things were balanced, where things were heavily industrialized, right? And I think that says something about President Trump's own thinking, right? I think in many ways he's a president who cares a lot about images, right? He cares a lot about memory, right? I think one of his major reasons why he opposed the Nippon Steel deal was the fact that it's U.S. steel. It's like you can't possibly give it away, right? I think it's also related to the issue that I think he has an idea of industry as a more traditional emphasis on industry based on manufacturing, right? Instead of less in terms of, he does want technological leadership, but he also really values the ability to produce and make stuff on your own. And as someone who was president during the COVID pandemic, he saw what a challenge that was, right? And so I think when we talk about rebalancing and revitalization, a lot of it is, the second version of it is also that, when I described economic security, is about essentially, I describe economic security as a way to conduct economic activity without fear of external coercion or disruption, right? You are able to basically, within a broadly market-based framework, to conduct economic activity. And economic security is the measures that we need to take to ensure that state of affairs exists. And I think that broadly is part of his emphasis on revitalization, right? Bring American industry back to the point where we do not have to worry about external coercion or dependencies that can, ruin the normal pattern of American economic activity. I think that is how he would describe it.
Okay. And the second question is, for Japanese audience, we like to know your message to the Japanese audience. You know that Japan is a major allied country of the United States. You briefly referred to the friendshoring, and but to bind the allied forces, we need a common agenda. You referred to the economic quotient, economic distortion. That's a negative factor to bind allied forces together. But we also need a positive message to the partners in the allied forces.
Sure, but I thank you for that question. I agree that negative forces, like friendshoring for negative reasons is negative. But I would say that it does turn into positive action, right? So I think in terms of what China is currently doing on its rare earths, essentially using America's use of FERPA on semiconductors to basically deny rare earths end use, like the use for end use certification, as well as denial of export licenses based on if it uses even Chinese machinery or technology for rare earths. I think that is a massive overstep, right? And I think frankly, I think it is a case where, I think America and its allies obviously may suffer from this. Certainly The legacy automotive semiconductor issue is also a very concerning one. Yes, these are negative impact, negative forces that are forcing us to cooperate. But I think it does become a positive result if we are able to start investing in these efforts together, right? So I think the gallium issue was something that we've been discussing for a while, right? It took a little while to go ahead and get it done, but I mean, it is going to, it is progressing ahead. The U.S. and Australia have agreed to a critical minerals sort of development, mining as well as refining and development agreement. And I expect that there will likely be something similar between the U.S. and Japan, especially next week when President Trump is in Tokyo, especially given the dominance of Japanese firms, especially trading firms like Sojitsu, in this space. And so I think, yes, these are negative reasons that remind us why we need to work together. But as long as it leads to positive action that long-term acknowledges the constant threat of blackmail, economic blackmail, unless we fix it, I think, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just we need to work faster and harder.
Okay, I'd like to take questions from the floor. Okay, I'd like to take one question from the net audience. That question is about the coalition in the Japanese newly formed government. How likely is it that coalition stays together? And how could this instability affect the U.S.-Japan relationship? Could you share your views on Japanese?
Sure. I mean, I'll take a stab at it, although, again, I always feel weird commenting about Japanese domestic politics to a room full of Japanese people, but sure, okay, I'll do it. So look, I think part of the reason why the LDP has been in power for so long was because they have experience running a government, right? They know how to run a government, and there are existing relationships between the LDP and those within the bureaucracy, right? That there is trust and relationships there that on how to deliver policy and results. I think Ishin's refraining from participating in the government, I think it's a realistic one, right? I think it's not that they don't want to, they obviously have policy objectives, right? They want to make Osaka the second capital. But at the same time, I think they are right to maybe observe and focus on understanding how government works, where their resources and expertise should be best utilized, and also develop their own expertise over time. So I'm very sure, perhaps in the future they will likely have, a few positions within the cabinet. And I'm not so concerned about that. In terms of how likely is the coalition stays together, well, that's really challenging, right? Because I think one of their major priorities is to ensure that to cut down on the number of Diet members, especially in the lower house. That will be extremely challenging. Obviously, the small parties that rely on proportional representation will fight it tooth and nail. I'm sure there will also be plenty of people within the LDP that will oppose it. And given the slim majority there, it's going to be a very tough fight for her, for Prime Minister Takaichi. And so how likely is it to stay together? I don't know. I mean, it will be challenging. That said, I mean, the two parties are fairly aligned on a lot of issues, right? They're more of a natural fit than most. And I think, I think also, I think Ishin will also play a moderating influence on some of on the new government's policies, which may actually indirectly have wider, broader-based appeal. Again, if you consider in terms of the issue of popular support, which I think the LDP does care about. And so in terms of how this instability affects the U.S.-Japan relationship, instability will really create a lot of problems. The U.S. is very eager to find partners to work with. The fact that we still haven't heard much on the way in terms of projects for the $550 billion, I think is very much a reflection of the political uncertainty that followed Japan in the past 3 months. And I think the U.S. is probably eager to have a government that they can work with.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to take a question also from the floor. If you have any question, please raise your hand.
Nancy Snow. I'm a professor and also write for Nikkei Asia, but I'm not going to write about this per se. But you're making the case for Japan and Washington. My field is public diplomacy, and I think this is a critical aspect to the U.S.-Japan relationship. I don't think it gets the visibility or understanding that it should. Mm-hmm. And I even noted when Takaichi won and it went global, a lot of the mainstream media coverage was Margaret Thatcher is into heavy metal. It was this biography rather than these critical issues. So you mentioned critical minerals, but when are we going to get beyond that to how critical this relationship is?
Yeah.
And you said better metrics of effective engagement. What would those be?
Sure. Okay. So two-part question. Unlike usual, I'll actually answer the first question first. So in terms of public diplomacy and sort of how Japan is depicted, right? I think that has been the thing that's the reason why I wrote that last slide, right? I know it's a bit of an awkward fit with this larger issue, but I think ultimately we are here all in this room because we fundamentally care about U.S.-Japan relations, right? And we want to make it effective and to demonstrate how important this relationship is towards our shared goals. I think the problem is that while many people in Washington like Japan, right, there's a tendency to not actually really understand what Japan's own motivations are, what its own capabilities are, right? Oftentimes I'll talk to people who are working in policy and they'll say, oh yeah, Japan will do that. Japan can take care of that. I was like, can they really? Really? What do you know about them? You know, and so it's out of that, frankly, frustration / surprise that I really think we need to devote more efforts into explaining things about Takaichi Shusho, right? Like the comparison with Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, I'm sure they're both strong women. They're both highly intelligent. Yeah, okay, sure. But like, I mean, even looking at casually at economics, you're like, you know, Takaichi Shusho's agenda is broadly fiscally expansionary. Margaret Thatcher led the way in privatization in Britain. Like, this is really like first level layer stuff that I don't understand why people would even make that connection, right? Obviously, you know, anytime you have a first time female prime minister, yeah, I mean, naturally you would think of Margaret Thatcher and make the comparison, but they're not alike, at least in terms of some areas of policy, right? It's just lazy thinking, as well as the many. Yeah, I mean, no, I'm not going to get into it, but I think there is a tendency in both sometimes in media and especially media as well as policy to just make these casual comparisons that are not actually rooted in depth or rigor. And I think, you know, as someone who came out of academia who always had to cite his sources or get yelled at by his graduate advisor, like I think we need to push harder. We need to do more to encourage this kind of rigorous thinking and explanation, right? And again, it goes to the fundamental, you know, you say public diplomacy. It's about communicating, demonstrating how Japan is crucial to our supply chains, or how much investment Japan is, or how deeply rooted Japanese firms have been in small communities in Western Virginia, in Ohio, in Texas for generations at this point, right? Like, that is the real work, instead of these casual descriptions of Takaichi that are just lazy. And I mean, sure, she likes heavy metal. She's a three-dimensional person. That's great. Most people are eventually. And so, like, that's just lazy. Going back to the issue of better metrics, I mean, I think fundamentally you can only have metrics if you know what your end goal is. And so what is your end goal, right? I mean, I think the right end goal is to consistently and reliably and demonstrate why the U.S.-Japan relationship matters, not just both on values and principles, but also in terms of real results, right? That is how I would define why the U.S.-Japan relationship matters. But others may have different end goals. But you have to calibrate those metrics and understand, which lines of argument, which actors in this policy space, whether they be industries, people, organizations, private companies, what are they actually doing? And are they actually delivering on your set of goals and metrics? So that's, I mean, it's squishy, I admit, but, like only, whatever sponsoring organization, right? When MOFA is trying to emphasize we need greater impact, policy impact in DC, what are your metrics? You have to have a clear vision. Then you have to, every once in a while, check on them and make sure that it's still consistent. Because I think there is a tendency to just sort of set it and forget it, and then realize that the results are not forthcoming, and that's not good.
From myself, additional questions. In the slide, in the last line in your presentation, there's think long-term and systematic. That's a very important message generally, but especially in discussing the strategic investment, I think long-term and systematically is a very important factor. But the investment decision critically depends on the future prospect of U.S. economies. So you talk about the future prospect of the Japanese coalition government. But now my question is about how majority of influential people in the policy circle in the United States view the future prospect of industrial growth.
Sure. I mean, I think. Let me try this particular argument. Please let me know if I've misinterpreted. But I think in terms of look, I mean, the Japanese government and Japanese business are specialists in long-term thinking, right? I mean, I think that's one of the admirable qualities about Japanese business that we realized back in the 1980s, right? During that era. So I think saying long-term, I think I mean that a little more in terms of maybe the emphasis is more on systematically, right? It's not just this investment in this particular investment project, right? It's not just about this investment in terms of this, for instance, creating a Japan chair at a university, right? You have to think systematically. How does this investment interact with all these other investments that other Japanese firms are making, and how do they cohere as part of this larger issue of, hey, how do we ensure that we don't have rare earths dependencies on unfair competitors long term, right? And I think that is a long-term concern, right? Because I think the rare earths issue is not going away. I know there's been research into non-rare earth magnets recently, but that's for the foreseeable future, we will only increase our demand, and so we have to commit to this, right? I don't see that as a sort of like investing in nickel and then all of a sudden realizing that lithium hydride is a more important, battery material. But with regards to that, we have to think systematically, right? This is something that I talked about with some people at the embassy, where there is a question of how do we improve Japanese studies in the United States, right? There is some frustration that some of the chairs at Columbia and Stanford are empty, right? And these are money given by the Japanese government to support Japanese studies in these universities, and they are sitting empty because they cannot agree on someone to replace, to put in those positions. Of course, if I were still in academia, I would offer, but then they would say no. But regardless, these are valuable positions, right? And so there's discussion, well, if we were to do it again, how would we do it differently? And especially now that we realize that increasingly you cannot do just diplomacy or just security or just economics. You have to integrate all three. When they asked me what I would recommend, I'm sure, I'm only one of many voices that they talk to, but my recommendation was you put it in a university where there's a strong engineering program, a strong business program, a strong STEM program, obviously, a strong public policy program, a strong, certainly humanities program, and you let that Japan chair in that university be the hub that introduces students to Japanese studies, but then they can then apply their knowledge of Japan into other areas where hopefully they can either become leading engineers or leading programmers or leading policymakers through that process. That's how you think systematically. It is not enough to just set up a Japan chair in a political science or a history program and then think that's all you have to do. And so that is what I mean. So maybe I meant more systematically than long term.
That's a very important message. For the last question, I'd like to take one question from the online audience back to the American politics. The audience would like to know your view on the challenges for Trump facing the midterm election in 2027.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're only at the midway point. Well, we're not even at the midway point for the midterm election. I mean, I think it all fundamentally goes back to the fact that the administration has been extremely ambitious with its aims. It has tried to do a lot in a very short amount of time. I think Trump learned from his first term that oftentimes he has to take the lead on implementing his policy because otherwise they'll get distracted or it'll get sidetracked. And so I think they have been very ambitious in trying to do all elements of its policies at once. Unfortunately, given the finite state of resources and manpower and time and government shutdowns, there is a real question of if they will be able to achieve a follow through on every one of their actions by the time the midterm elections come around. And so that can create a lot of tension in terms of we haven't seen results yet. Is it really the right policy? I think these are likely debates to be that will probably go on over the summer because especially when you try to do so many different lines of effort, it'll just take time, and especially if it's creating a new multiple rare earths initiatives that frankly won't be delivered, even MP materials, right, won't be delivered until 2028 in terms of a new plant in Texas. There's always the question of, well, where are the results? Well, it'll take time, and that creates uncertainty for the election.
Yeah, my related question is, I agree with you that it takes time to materialize the policy outcome, but during the same period, many of the citizens in the United States will face more serious inflation, partly due to the higher tariff and the persistent fiscal deficit or the weaker dollar. That's outside environmental factors, outside the reach of the policy. Yeah. How these factors affect the outcome of the next election?
I mean, I think certainly if there is higher inflation, or if it's either through both in terms of trade policy as well as external responses to American trade policy, or frankly external trade negotiation tactics certain material cutoffs, creating crisis within the American economy. I think that could very well sort of impact election prospects and sort of ability to implement agendas, right? And so I think this goes back to the other point, which is, going back to what I think I mentioned with Takeichi Shusho, right? You have to, I think one of my biggest criticisms of the past administration was the failure to explain how these larger geopolitical, geoeconomic issues in economic security and competition are impacting ordinary Japanese and Americans. I think the last administration never took on that task, even though it was very easy, especially in the years after COVID. And I think this is an opportunity for this administration to be proactive and inform the American people about these are the ways in which this is the reason why your cars are so expensive. These are the ways why you cannot buy a new car because there's been a cutoff in automotive semiconductors, right? This is the chance when we have to better inform American consumers and voters on just how why things happen the way that they are, and challenge the American voter to understand that these are problems that we all need to address together. So yeah.
And one more question from the online audience is about the exchange rate. And you know that the Trump administration seems to focus on the trade issues, especially the tariff and the trade in goods. But also important issue is the currency, dollar. The audience would like to know your views on the prospect of the exchange rate. That's a difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, what I'll say is on exchange rates, I think it's something that they've raised in the past. From at least from the U.S.-Japan standpoint, my understanding is that Secretary Bessent and then Finance Minister Kato agreed that U.S.-Japan exchange rate, the yen exchange rate, was operating at a level consistent with market principles. Right, there were no issues to be addressed, I think, back in June. We'll see what the new policy of the new ministry of the new government in Japan will affect currency rates. I think there was an initial weakening of the yen, but I think it's been moderated a little bit, both with the presence of Ishin as well as influential members within the LDP who are influencing policy. And so we'll see how that goes, right? I will just point out that one of the major concerns of the $550 billion investment was that before we really knew the elements of exactly how it would be financed, there was real concern that it would really influence foreign exchange rates, currency rates between the U.S. and Japan. Now that we know, and I wrote about this recently, about how JPIC is primarily financing it with JPIC, dollar-backed JPIC bonds, transfers of American dollars from Japanese foreign exchange holdings to the United States, and obviously through the use of both Japanese as well as likely American loan guarantees. I think that has moderated a lot of concerns that would be a source of disruption to the currency exchange.
Okay, thank you. Now it's time to close the seminar. Thank you very much, Dr. Chu. Thank you very much for your participation in our BBL seminar today.